Okay, what else is important? Okay, we're green, we're environmentally focused, we're reliant and increasingly wanting to use smart technology to do our shopping and our buying, and we're increasingly impatient for when that goods or service is delivered. That's a consumer world, if you like. Technology and mobile technology in particular will be increasingly important to consumer activity, as they are already today, but it's increasingly important in our ability to interact. An example from the farming community, if you know Farmville on Facebook, it's the most popular game on Facebook. It's probably about 80 or 90 million people now. I have a statistic from last year. But there's an Italian startup now that allows you online to control a patch of land, which they will farm for you, then they will harvest the crops and bring it to you. So you can go online and do some farming today. And things like that, where you can connect with the land or the fish farm, are going to increasingly engage people in urban contexts with their food supply and food chains. They're beginning to come out even now. Of course, ethical considerations in that world I've just described to you are going to be increasingly important as we learn to get along with new rules, with new numbers of people, with new emerging economies with increasing wealth and activity, and we're going to care about our environment en masse in the process. About 30 to 40% of the food we produce in the world is thrown away or wasted. 30 to 40%. So, the good news is Finns are very high up in the ethical purchasing consumer index. Number one good news. Finns and your neighbors nearby. We are looking for suppliers with that added degree of social engagement and benefit, whether that's coming through initiatives that are started by your CSR programs, your corporate social responsibility, or genuinely products and services that are going about the business of trying to bring products to you that are sourced and managed ethically. So there's a whole range of drivers in the food industry. I'm not going to talk to these, we really don't have time. But there's a lot, again, divergent forms of drivers about convenience and personalization and fast and nostalgic. All of these are drivers in the food industry and changing one segment of it or another. On the other hand, your neighbor in Russia has enjoyed no recession to notice in this area, in consumption, and have moved ahead very different speed to their neighbors in the EU. You may notice, I don't know how much business they do over here in Finland, but I suspect they've done quite a lot of buying over the last few years. So, changing consumer experiences. I mentioned discount vouchers. Groupon, valued about $1.5 billion at the moment. Google tried to buy them a few months ago for $6 billion and were rejected, and they're going for a flotation valuing them at about $15 billion or thereabouts, they're hoping. And basically they provide vouchers and discounts and offers to consumers. We have got used to the business, and it is big business, of offering discounts and coupons that used to be the territory of the very poor in our society, but now the stigma attached to that has gone away completely. The heroes are now the people who get to go to New York for 40 bucks, not the people who show off and say they spent 4,000 euros to go for a weekend in New York. That doesn't impress anybody. But getting there with vouchers and coupons and only paying $40 are the new heroes. So the other things are we increasingly want to try things out. We are experimenting more, we're interactive, we're much more responsive as people, and all around the world there are now opportunities to sample what you've got to offer. So as I mentioned up here, Spain, you can sample in stores, cafes in Tokyo, and there are machines now that with a little bit of information you give them will give you things for nothing. Again, different business models that we'll undoubtedly get used to. The other thing is that increasingly people are happy to promote you, certainly with their connections online, if they like what you do and how you do it. So this is the idea of the saleshumer, that effectively the idea that you use your customer to promote you heavily is a way of taking your product to market. Or alternatively, just appear temporarily in a fixed retail setting, appear for a moment in time and make your offers and then disappear again. So this idea of temporary, again, is another nature. We don't have to do everything permanently, but just when there is a season for things to be right. Now, we've had a period where technology since the 50s drove an awful lot of consumer activity and business activity, and it still does, very, very much. In the 80s and noughties, we pretty much moved to a marketing model where there was plenty of money and we were promoting ourselves using traditional and new avant-garde marketing models. Now social innovation, social tools, social networks, social media, we are connected in a way that we have never been in the past that allow us to interact with our environment, our friends, our neighbors, our businesses, our suppliers, in new and emerging models. So there's a great strength of belief that that model of social interconnection will lead a lot of business in the next few years. So the other thing is online used to be simply another channel to provide your product or service or knowledge to market. Online is now a separate channel offering different products and services that you can't find available in the real world, and has become a channel and a product provider in its own right, not just an alternative way of taking existing products to market. And George Monbiot said this a few years ago, that if we could organize our distribution of food in such a way that we didn't need to travel to the supermarket, that we could knock out between 80 and 90% of the carbon footprint of providing food to retail and food to homes. So with that driver and that need, how much more will we have home deliveries around the world, as opposed to the option of picking it up and treating it more as a social experience? Alternatively, we go completely virtual, and environments like Second Life, if you've looked at those sorts of environments where we can interact with people and do our shopping and have them delivered environmentally friendly in a more managed method rather than actually us traveling to the supermarket. Okay, agriculture. Are we okay on people and consumers? We've rushed through that at a fair pace. I appreciate that, and probably missed out an awful lot of detail, but I want to give you the top line. Very quickly, look, over this next 30, 40 years, in particular, we're going to have to get increasingly more productive, and yet that isn't the answer to feeding the people. Using less harmful chemicals because we care about the planet, as I said, in one of those major drivers of change. The big area, 30 to 40%, is reducing waste in the process, and I'll cover that in just a moment. Protecting our environment as we go about the business of farming, and of course, reducing the exposure to the huge agflation that we saw in 2007, and giving some ability to provide consistent pricing to the food chain. The agflation was one of the causes of the crash that left our economies weak from having to fund petro imports and food imports in many societies. So it's a $1 trillion economy. It's a great economy if you're involved in it, which you clearly are. Farming takes about 70% of the water that's extracted from the earth, and therefore has a huge part to play in preserving and sharing those resources as more people take their place on this planet. And of course, give out enormous numbers of greenhouse gases. And you'll know, if we increase farm stock and livestock, you'll know what gases they give out. And the more of that, methane, the more problem we're in. So, number one, let's reduce the waste. So whatever we can do to improve the distribution in our supermarkets and our methods for delivery, but also us in the richer countries buying only what we need and wasting less in the process. Alternatively, several wildcards are proposed, one of which is making meat in large vats and removing that plant, 11 calories of plant foodstuffs to make one calories worth of meat. We can cut that down, we can fix the amount of land we need to feed ourselves. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. Alternatively, maybe we make our own food at home. So this is mini hydroponics, where we grow our food in our home, and the fish live in the tank as well. The fish excrete what they excrete, which feeds the plants, and the plants clean the water. So maybe we'll have our own eco-cultures in our homes or apartment blocks. Maybe we'll take on MIT's 3D food printer, where you can combine and make foods in solid form in our home for our community. Maybe these are answers in the future. And of course, it's about convenience. Alternatively, in an urbanized world, you move to making foodstuffs vertically as opposed to horizontally. And I suspect that's going to be covered more eloquently by Serku later in this presentation. And almost at the close, biotechnology is set as one of the fastest growing industries in the world to improve the yield from our crops, reducing costs, or at least managing costs, declining water supplies. It addresses many of those issues, so that's one to bet on if you like. And we've now got 333 million acres of land under biocrops today, so a huge increase in those areas. So what do? Temperatures going up. We're forecast 1.8 to 4 degrees Celsius, floods, droughts, more severe weather patterns to deal with. Reducing the crop yield already by 20 to 40% or thereabouts, unless we invoke some other technologies, which we can do, and we're at risk of destroying a certain numbers of species. Water stress is going to be one of the biggest drivers, and India and China, where we're hoping to power 70 to 75% of our next few decades' economic growth in the world are some of 2 of the most water-stressed areas on the planet. So you've got some very interesting opportunities and threats coming from that environment. But if you add this up in 2030, you've got about 5 billion people who are suffering severe water stress, access to potable water for their lifestyle preferences out of a population of 9 billion. So we won't be able to avoid the issues I've been talking about on being more prudent with access and use of that fresh water. The EU, of course, is not particularly a fan of GM crops at the moment, and I suspect that may weaken as we move towards bio crops being needed. But their goal is to reduce 315 terawatts of power every year, which is the entire power output of Italy for the year. That's the degree that EU is forecasting we use less power. So just throwing more machinery that is power hungry at that problem is not the only answer. We have to do things more effectively so we can move forward. So what do we do? Less meat production clearly goes against the demand I've been talking about from consumers, but it's more efficient for getting calorie food to consumers. And maybe we'll have to have that made more locally and remove some of the distribution costs that we've got used to in our societies. I mentioned GM crops. GM has an answer to much of this, but of course it's controversial, as not yet proven in some people's minds, and maybe something that's going to be hard to get out of the blocks, but it does remove some of the need for harmful chemicals. It does make more use of potable water, of fresh water, and it does make more use of our land. And we're struggling to increase the amount of land on the planet we can put under cultivation. And final slide. This one, which I picked, is one government's view of how to fix the problems. Less food waste. More land to grow goods, products. More food bought in season, as opposed to pushing it out of season and transporting it around the world. Looking at a sustainable model of farming, adopting leaner and healthier diets to improve our life expectancy and also reduce the amount of food we need to produce, and promoting a higher crop yield. So thank you very much. I hope that's been an interesting and whirlwind tour across some of the issues of the future. Thank you.